Record. We're at the Dell networking booth.
Yes, I am. We are in Santa Clara campus, and here at the ONF SDN Summit, we are demonstrating dynamic insertion of the services in a multi-tenant environment as an application of OpenFlow SDN. And in this demo, the solution consists of three components. At the bottom portion, Dell switches working with the big switch controller, and at the top layer, orchestration, which is demonstrating the value of the OpenFlow, is the AIM management system. And this picture is giving physical view, wherein like you have these racks and trying to host web services, and you start off with a single web server, and then you're trying to carve out the network resources per tenant. This is the physical view, and this is one tenant view, and you can create multiple of these out of the same physical equipment.
Can you pause for... So where were we?
So just as a recap, this is the physical view. Think of these two racks in the data center, and then we are trying to host multi-tenant environment, and it could be either provider doing, or it could be enterprise trying to separate different groups, service different groups of people. And this is the tenant view, which is more of a logical, but the tenant get the idea that I have my own resources, I have full control of them. Although this is logical, not physical. And here describing the components of this solution. At the top, AIM, which is enhanced to work in the SDN environment, using the big switch as a controller, providing the network virtualization through which we are able to provide a logical switch to each tenant, and it is controlling and programming the switch underneath, so the provider didn't have to do. This is detail of the demo, and you start off with a simple client trying to access a web services. It's a web server, and you front-ended with a load balancer just for the future expansion of the web services. So as the load goes up, AIM dynamically brings up the new web server, which get automatically connected to the load balancer. This is all done through dynamically through controller and the switch. And now comes the load is going up, and now we are trying to borrow some of the web server compute resources from the second rack. And since it is a different rack, we want to insert a firewall to protect the resources. And the client is still going through without any changes. The traffic is being served through new web servers, and these pictures kind of show behind the scenes. This is just a user experience. This is what is like tenant view, network showing the network virtualization. So this picture actually is from AIM screen, which is dynamically updated, refresh as they get connected. All these lines that you see, internal and external networks, which is actually a configuration behind in the big switch. This is all done through the AIM orchestration without manual intervention. And this is how the operator here is tenant view looks like. I have this rack, and I have a load balancer here and a web server, and this is what I'm managing, right? Mm-hmm. And now in the second step, when we added additional web server, the network view from the AIM screen get updated to show the additional web server. And if you notice from previous step to here, additional configuration has been populated to the big switch controller, and this is the view. We added extra web servers to handle the additional traffic. And this is the final. This is the second service that's been inserted dynamically based on taking up the resource from the second rack, and the firewall got installed and up and running and connected. all through dynamic without any human touch. And now it is showing a fully populated picture with additional web servers with the firewall. And as you can see, because we created the firewall, this is to reflect I have resources that I don't want to share. I don't want to have traffic between these two. I isolated by having two virtual switches. We worked with one virtual switch here, and now we got two virtual switches so that you don't cross the traffic between these two tracks.
Awesome.
And that's what the final picture.
So we saw the hardware looked like we were using is a Force 10, was it S55 or
S60.
S60?
In this demo,
Okay.
we use S60, but you could use 4810. That's also capable of.
Okay. So does this use the the software that they have, the Perl and Python scripting that they have, or is it using a standard? Do you know the standard?
This is the OpenFlow agent.
Only OpenFlow. Okay.
OpenFlow agent, and we are not using the Python scripts in this. And what we did is the Big Switch controller offers northbound APIs to web services called REST interface, and AIM controller utilize those web services and communicating to the controller through the REST interface.
So I was going to ask you too. So AIM already had this capability, maybe through different programmatic means, to be able to go out and manipulate network components. So for the way that Big Switch presents itself through, via APIs, is that essentially very similar to kind of what it was already doing, but using a different type of API?
The answer is no. Yes, if it was a traditional networking with like Cisco switch or Juniper switch, whatever, whatnot, you would have used the CLI SNMP interface. Okay, yeah, so what? Here we use the web services. That's not still visible to the customer. What is new here in this picture, SDN, is the network virtualization. As you see, the physical view is still, you got two switches, and in this demo we only showed two virtual switches, but these virtual switches, this operator, the tenant, thinks they have that whole switch by themselves. That's what we are giving. That's not possible in the traditional mode. Yeah, you're given a VLAN and then it's more of a broadcast domain control as opposed to a true, fully functional switch. It would have characteristics, you can add ACLs, you can have the type of behavior you would want to do with a switch with this, what we call logical big virtual switch.
And I know one of
switch is the difference.
one of the other things Kyle mentioned that I was
The slicing.
trying to wrap, not just the slicing, but also just more simple facts of if you're using CLI, if you're using SNMP, how difficult it is from a programming standpoint to maintain understanding of state, to maintain the ability to know that the command was accepted and implemented properly, to be able to roll back potentially. All those things are difficult to do, whether you SNMP, CLI, but just using the API helps a lot, right?
In some sense, it is you give the information identifier. It's more like a language of its own, similar to CLI. You may change the format of the CLI, but the resource identifier is a resource identifier.
Yeah, and it is still RESTful.
And
so
then it's a RESTful, and people are more familiar with that, and it is more. If it is a REST interface, it is more standard way. I don't have to learn another language yet another CLI, right? So even within Cisco you have multiple CLI, so you have to know exact format of it. Here you're using the constructs of RESTful, which is nothing new for a big switch. So you're utilizing the known interface as opposed to vendor specific interface. So RESTful is nothing special for big switch, right? So that's the advantage. So I don't have to learn a lot about internals, right? Or if I'm using SNMP, I need to know OID and all those details, right?
So it adds the big buzzword at this conference, a layer of abstraction.
Yeah,
a little bit. I mean, it's not a huge layer of abstraction, but
it is not a huge, because the RESTful interface, maybe if you put like another controller, it would be different in a sense. It's the same interface, RESTful, but your resource identifier is the different. That's what I would have to change, which is much easier than if I were to use CLI. I can easily change from Cisco CLI to Juniper CLI or Extreme CLI, right? So that's the difference. Whereas here I can use the same mechanism. If they support REST interface, then it's the same mechanism. I just have to change the resource identifier.
Thank you very much.